Hey everyone, it's good to see you. We are excited to see you, and we are also conducting our typical sound check, and I guess it's really a tech check, just to make sure
Yeah,
that we are
we're
broadcasting on all of the channels that we're supposed to on Facebook, in the app, and also on YouTube. And then once we've confirmed that we are in fact broadcasting on those, then we'll actually get into our official presentation talking about the Hebrew roots of our faith in part one. And then we'll set that up for part two.
yes, we are live. We are broadcasting. So welcome, welcome. We are really most prominent in our Facebook group, in our private Facebook group. And if you are here, I can't see um all the chats. I can check it on my phone though. So if you are here, please say hello. We love the interaction, and I will be kind of manning that tonight because tonight we have a very special treat. We were it was really on our hearts to just really focus tonight on the Hebrew roots of our Christian faith. And that's what we talk about all the time, where we talk about the months and we do monthly coaching and all these things. And that's why we created Inspired Life and our book Inspired Life guide. This guide takes us through the whole year, and there is so much good stuff in here. And like we talked about last week, our new 2025 edition will be ready to go Friday. We're very excited about
Mhm.
that. So we will be kind of giving you guys an update next week. When we have the new guide, you'll see the new cover, and Dan has been working on this tirelessly. Like, I mean, he's put this whole thing together. And this year for this edition, he has added so much because we keep learning more and more. Every year we learn more, and every month we learn more. In fact, there's so much that we can't even put it all in here because it would
Yeah.
be like this thick. But it's awesome because what we realized is that we haven't really done an overview like this where we talk about the Hebrew roots of our faith and how our faith was established that way and where it separated and how we got here where we are. And we're going to really delve into that completely tonight. So I really want to, I'm going to hand it over to Dan to go. I'll probably chime in here or there, but he's going to share his incredible wisdom and as he shares with us the background of the Hebrew roots to our Christian faith.
Oh, thanks, honey. Yeah, so actually, this update I'm really excited about. I wrote all of it in Hebrew. So you guys are going to really have to up your game, learn Hebrew just so you can read it. It's going to be great. No, it's all in English, so it's good. But we are really excited about the changes and updates that we make. We always are trying to improve it. And one of the things that we kind of get asked is why? Why, go into these Hebrew roots? Why talk about it? Why does it matter? I remember when we got back from Israel and we started to really develop an interest in this, God really kind of opened our eyes to a lot of things on that trip. And our daughter asking us, "Are we Jewish now?" And
Mm,
it's a good question, actually. And we're going to kind of delve into the answer to that in a little bit. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we kind of got here. And a lot of it has to do with our mindset, or another way of putting it, if you prefer, would be worldview. In other words, it's how do we interpret the world around us? What do we use to make sense of what happens? What do we use to explain what's going on? And so it has to do with mindset. And so mindset in some ways is and by the way, this is all content out of the book. This is not like this is all in there, right? But a mindset it's a habitual mental attitude that we have that determines how we interpret and respond to life. And so every time that we are putting our trust in God, we're building a mindset that prepares us to experience Him in a more intimate way. And then over time, our minds and hearts become increasingly united with His. For example, Hebrews 3:1 talks about, therefore, brothers, whom God has set apart, who share in the call of heaven, think carefully about Yeshua, whom we acknowledge publicly as God's emissary and Kohen Gadol, which is high priest. So it really shouldn't be a surprise that the battle for our minds, or our mindsets, if you will, is the most important arena of spiritual warfare. And again, trust me, this is just the mindset. We are getting into how we got away from this, but we have to understand where we were and how this came about first. So this is something that the Bible is really clear about, and says specifically that we need to protect our minds, because that's where the adversary comes for us. In Proverbs 3:5, it says, trust in Adonai with all your heart. Do not rely on your own understanding. And then in Proverbs 4:23, it says, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the source of life's consequences. So this is something that the Bible takes quite seriously, because God knows that this is the avenue that the adversary comes for us. And so when we protect ourselves against the mindset of the world, and we start devoting ourselves to God, it quickly becomes apparent that in order to really do that, I mean, not just go through the motions, not just be religious, but I mean, really genuinely connected to God, that requires trust. And so we have to ask ourselves, where is our trust? Is our trust really truly in God, or is it in ourselves, or is it somewhere else? Right? And again, this is not something to get guilty over or shame-filled over. It's just an honest question that we need to get really curious about, because our mindset really matters, probably in a bigger way than we really understand. And so all these conscious and unconscious functions of our mindset is driving our thoughts, it's driving our actions, and those are either in alignment with what God says is true, or they're in alignment with something else. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to experience a mindset that has been transformed by God. In Romans 12:2, it says, in other words, do not let yourselves be conformed to the standards of the Olam Hazeh, or the Greek age. Instead, keep letting yourselves be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you will know what God wants, and will agree that what he wants is good, satisfying, and able to succeed. Right? So if we wanted to sort of put a framework, name it, in other words, mindset. There are three general mindsets that have kind of controlled the world, if you will. These are the ones that, and obviously there's a lot of variation, and at some points these mindsets have been more popular than in other times, but in general, these are kind of the three governing mindsets. And we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on them, but we just want to at least talk about them enough to give you a clear idea of what we mean. So the world of the Old Testament, prior to Israel becoming a nation, was largely ruled by what might be called a barbarian mindset. A barbarian mindset operates under the basic principle of fear. And the reason for that is because fearful people are easily manipulated and controlled. So, as you might imagine, this is pretty much the adversary's favorite tactic, because he is an oppressor by nature who loves to still kill and enslave. And so he holds humanity, and sadly, even some believers, in such fear that they're either unable or unwilling to resist him. And this is kind of another topic for another time, but you have to wonder, why do so many of God's people resist learning intercessory prayer and avoid engaging in spiritual warfare? Just something to think about. We'll put a pin in that, though.
Yeah.
So, but the barbarian mindset is probably most clearly illustrated in the rule of the pagan kings of the Middle East, who ruthlessly governed as tyrants. They exerted, absolute control over their terrified subjects. In fact, modern terrorism was birthed from such a mindset, because, as we mentioned earlier, fearful sheeple, if you will, are more easily dominated. The problem is that whenever we're making an agreement with fear, We're basically subjecting ourselves to the enemy's control. But if we resist him, then the enemy flees. And here's the good news. The power of a lie lasts only as long as it is believed. Here's the thing. Since it's impossible to walk in both fear and faith at the same time, we have to be intentional about choosing faith. Romans 8:15 says, "For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to bring you back again into fear. On the contrary, you received the Spirit who makes us sons and by whose power we cry out, Abba," that is, dear Father, or Daddy, if you will. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God gave us a spirit who produces not timidity, but power, love, and self-discipline." 1 John 4:18 says, "There is no fear in love. On the contrary, love that has achieved its goal gets rid of fear, because fear has to do with punishment, and the person who keeps fearing has not been brought to maturity in regard to love." And so this is why the enemy attacks so powerfully in the barbarian mindset. It's his favorite tactic, but it is by no means his only one. In fact, we have something that we term the Greek mindset. Now, remember, the Greeks practiced a polytheism. They worshipped multiple gods. But all the gods were created in the image of man. They were just sort of like men with superpowers, right? But this is a mindset that says, hey, we are our own gods who possess the power within ourselves to create a perfect world in which everyone works together towards the highest good. It sounds good on paper, but in practice, it becomes very elitist. It's, hey, I know how to live your life better than you do, so I'm just going to go ahead and take power over your life and tell you what to do and live your life for you. All for your good, of course. And this is something that we see a lot around us. Pride is the operating principle of this mindset, because pride filters everything through a humanistic perspective, one that puts God second and first, right? So consequently, the Greeks really bought into this notion that knowledge was power. And what that meant was, if a thing could be understood, then the outcome could be controlled and manipulated. And when you view yourself as basically a god, well, that's what it is. You just have to learn enough or know enough, and then you can do that. And so the problem is, the Greek mindset took this and it reduced the mind to sort of a in the box, by the book kind of thinking. Sometimes it might be easier to think of this as the adversary's plan B, because although he prefers the fear tactics of oppression, he's only too happy to exploit a Greek mindset in order to convince someone that they're doing good while preventing them from experiencing God's best. And so in this way, good actually becomes the enemy of great, right? The other problem is that a Greek mindset worships human reason, and it rejects anything that it determines is quote unquote unscientifically explainable. And sadly, this mindset has become increasingly popular in the modern church, with the Holy Spirit, spiritual gifts, and miracles either, for the most part, largely marginalized or simply ignored. And so as a result, many believers are living as practical agnostics who are misaligned with God's story for their lives. You know, you can read the Bible two ways. You can read the Bible as a book of exceptions, or you can read the Bible as a book of possibilities. In other words, you look at how God interacted with people in the Bible and say, that's possible for me too. Or, oh, wow, that was so great for those people back then. Of course, that would never happen now. It's two different ways of looking at it. True. But this idea of being misaligned with God's story, Romans 1, 21 through 22 kind of addresses it. He says, on the contrary, they have become futile in their thinking, and their undiscerning hearts have become darkened. Claiming to be wise, they have become fools. And again, that's the end of humanistic wisdom. It gets you so far. And when you compare it to God's wisdom, I mean, there is no comparison, right? So here's the thing. In this, keep in mind that God always fulfills his promises, always. But he's not obligated to fulfill our potential. That's something that happens in partnership with him. When he gives us a word, we must be willing to trust him enough to follow wherever it leads. Some lessons, sadly, can only be learned in battle. But the good news is God only invites us into battles that he has prepared us to win. And then our victories strengthen our trust in him and empower us to enter and remain in, if you want to call it our quote, promised land, right? That place of union and connection with God and with one another, right? So these are two of the mindsets. Again, there's multiple variations of these, but these are two of the mindsets the enemy has used a lot. And so that brings us to the third. This is the Hebrew mindset. This is what we believe we need to get back to, right? The Hebrew mindset is a biblical mindset. And by the way, it doesn't require you to be Jewish, but is the state of someone whose thinking has been transformed by God's truth. For thousands of years, he shaped the Jewish culture to bring them into a deeper alignment with his heart and his mindset. And God is calling us into the very same journey. This is something God reminds us of in Isaiah 55. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and your ways are not my ways, says Adonai. So is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me unfulfilled, but it will accomplish what I intend and cause to succeed what I sent it to do. And this is what we can trust. This is the God who's on our side that we're partnering with. And so God really instilled this biblical cycle of life into the Hebrew heart by celebrating, they call them Moedim, or appointed times, right? These are special times set apart for God. And that happens on a weekly basis called Shabbat or Sabbath. It happens on a monthly basis called the Rosh Chodesh, or the head of the month celebrations. And then also the high festivals. So this is something that's happening weekly, monthly, and yearly. God is inviting us into a cycle of connection with him. And so if you go back and you look at God's original plan for Israel, he gifted them with practical wisdom for success and showed them this is how you prosper. So the world could see that, look, God is the one who has all truth. God is the one who can tell you how to enjoy the best life. And the best life starts with loving him and then goes from there. And so this is how God taught the Hebrews a new mindset. Again, one that was different from the barbarian mindset, one that was different from the Greek mindset. And he teaches them this new mindset, this new way of life that literally no nation on earth had ever seen before. And so here's the thing. The operating principle of the Hebrew mindset is trust in God. Because it's through this trust that we are given a priceless gift. And that gift is having our heart, mind, soul, and spirit united with him. And the more deeply we experience God's love, the more we are transformed into alignment with his purposes. The interesting thing, and well, not interesting, it's sort of typical when you understand the adversary is the one behind it, but the barbarian and Greek mindsets both view this transformation as literal foolishness. 1 Corinthians frames it this way in chapter 1. For the message about the execution stake is nonsense to those in the process of being destroyed. But to us in the process of being saved, it is the power of God. Wow. So those are the mindsets that were kind of running the world, if you will. These are the mindsets that were in operation. And obviously, because of the operating principles that guide them, they are all in conflict with each other. And so, like I said, at varying times and places, these mindsets have been preeminent, and in other times, they kind of go with the tides, right? Some they flow in, they flow out. and they change. And obviously, like we mentioned earlier, there's tons of variation within them, but these are the mindsets. And so the larger question, getting back to our beginning, is how did we lose this mindset? How did we lose the Hebrew roots of our faith? There's an author by the name of Terry Pratchett, and he frames it this way. He says, it's important to know where we came from, because if you don't know where you come from, then you don't know where you are. And if you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going. And if you don't know where you're going, you're probably going wrong.
Mm.
And so that sounds very simple, but it's really kind of a profound observation, because if we're asking ourselves, well, how did we lose this Hebrew mindset? Why does it even matter? When and how did we forget? I mean, is there a cost to it, to our faith, to our families, But the interesting thing is, and I'm going to read a series of scriptures to you, and just kind of highlight this. And again, I'm very intentionally reading these because I just want to be very, very clear. This is not like well, theoretically speaking, we have these Hebrew roots, or, I kind of always just feel like, no, the Bible makes a very, very clear path for us to follow. And when we get to the end of that path, I believe that you are going to see that, look, yes, we absolutely have Hebrew roots. Absolutely. Did you want to add something, honey?
No, this is so awesome. I remember how clear this came after we went to Israel, and recognizing that so much that we learned in kind of American church or American Christianity was through that Greek lens.
Yeah.
And so much gets even brought in from a new age kind of a thought process and different things, like and even just really the elimination of gifts, and really not even delving that much into the spirit, really understanding the spirit and the role of the Holy Spirit in our lives, and to be able to really hear that and listen for that. And it's just so powerful. I remember when we first started looking at this, it was sort of like a mind blow, like, wow.
Yeah.
And understanding that you're really not going to fully even grasp the scriptures if you're looking at it through a Greek lens, because it makes me think about, like, in school, when you're learning for a test, you're getting
Right.
taught to a test. So you're learning about these things, but nothing is connecting. And when you don't have that deep understanding of the Hebrew roots of these things, like the people, by the way, that were getting the New Testament at the time, who had that,
Right.
they, you can read the New Testament, and then when you start learning these Hebrew roots, you read things from Paul or and you just go, how did I miss this before? Because you didn't have the context. And it's so, so important. So I love this
Yeah.
section of our book so much, because, we talk about mindset all the time, in coaching and in life, and what's your mindset. And this is kind of a different side of that. It's a different take on it, is understanding how we learn. And I love how you said it's really your worldview. It's like, having a biblical worldview. Well, what does that mean? Is that an American biblical worldview that has gone through these schools of theology that have been
Right.
Americanized, and they're very much a Greek teaching? Or is it truly a Hebrew? And that is, it's a never ending journey of learning that.
Right.
So it's beautiful.
So what I want to do is I want to walk us through, according to scripture, the Hebraic roots of Christianity, because they go all the way back to God's original covenant with Abraham, which is circa 1800 BC. Okay. So this is in Genesis 12. God will make you, Abram, a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you are to be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, but I will curse anyone who curses you. And by you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Now, this is a covenant that God later expands on in Genesis 17. He says, Adonai appeared to Abram, and said to him, I am El Shaddai, which means God Almighty. Walk in my presence and be pure-hearted. I will make my covenant between me and you. I will increase your numbers greatly. Abram fell on his face, and God continued speaking with him. As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. Your name will no longer be Abram, which means exalted father, but your name will be Abraham, which is father of many, because I have made you the father of many nations. I will cause you to be very fruitful, and I will make nations of you. Kings will descend from you. I'm establishing my covenant between me and you, and this is the important part, along with your descendants after you, generation after generation, as an everlasting covenant to be God for you and for your descendants after you. So it lays it all out. Now, this is then confirmed with Isaiah's prophecy, circa 1300 BC, when it confirmed the fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham would come through Jesus. So in Isaiah 11, it says, but a branch will emerge from the trunk of Jesse, a shoot will grow from his roots. Remember, Jesus descended from the line of David, right? And it was in Jesus that both Jew and Gentile were fully grafted, because in Romans 11, we find, but if some of the branches were broken off, and you, the Gentiles, a wild olive, were grafted in among them, meaning the Jews, and have become equal sharers in the rich root, in this case, Jesus, of the olive tree, then don't boast as if you were better than the branches. However, if you do boast, remember that it is you are not supporting the root is supporting you.
Right? That's it right there.
And so being grafted into Jesus, who is the root, represented the fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham that brought Jew and Gentile together into his blessings. In Ephesians 3:6, it kind of expands on that. It says that in union with the Messiah and through the good news, the Gentiles were to be joint heirs, a joint body and joint sharers with the Jews in what God has promised. And when Jesus' sacrifice satisfied the Torah for all time in order to fulfill the covenant that God had made with Abraham, we find in Galatians 3, does this mean that the legal part of the Torah, meaning the law, stands in opposition to God's promises? Heaven forbid. For if the legal part stands in opposition, for if the legal part of the Torah, which God gave, had in itself the power to give life, then righteousness really would have come by legalistically following such a Torah. But instead, the Tanakh had in itself the Jewish.
Sorry about that.
But instead, the Tanakh, which includes the teaching, the prophets, the writings, shuts up everything under sin so that what has been promised might be given on the basis of Jesus, the Messiah's trusting faithfulness to those who continue to be trustingly faithful. Now, before the time of this trusting faithfulness came, we were imprisoned in subjection to the system, which results from perverting the Torah into legalism. Under guard until this yet to come trusting faithfulness would be revealed. Accordingly, the Torah functioned as a custodian until the Messiah came, so that we might be declared righteous on the ground of trusting and being faithful. But now that the time for this trusting faithfulness has come, we are no longer under a custodian. That's because Jesus fulfilled the law, and now we live in the law through him. Through Jesus, Jew and Gentile are completely unified into one body. So now we have all of this being brought together. Ephesians 2, it says, therefore, remember your former state, you Gentiles by birth, called the uncircumcised by those who merely because of an operation on their flesh are called the circumcised. At that time had no Messiah, You were estranged from the national life of Israel. You were foreigners to the covenants embodying God's promise. You were in this world without hope and without God. But now, you who were once far off have been brought near through the shedding of the Messiah's blood. For he himself is our shalom, or our peace. He has made us both one and has broken down the machitza, which is the middle wall of the boundary fence, which divided us by destroying his own body, the enmity occasioned by the Torah with its commands set forth in the form of ordinances. He did this in order to create in union with himself from the two groups one single new humanity, and thus make shalom, or peace, and in order to reconcile to God both in a single body by being executed on the stake as a criminal, and thus in himself killing that enmity. I mean, it's and unified into one body. 1 Corinthians 12 even expands further. For just as the body is one but has many parts, and all the parts of the body, though many, constitute one body, so it is with the Messiah. For it was by one Spirit that we were all immersed into one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. So when you really go through from the Old Testament into the New, the Hebrew roots of Christianity are as certain and rock solid as any Ancestry.com DNA result. I mean, it's spelled out. And yet, probably, like when we think about it, we've never, I mean, those scriptures might even be familiar to you. You might even have them highlighted in your Bible. But when you put them all together and you see this continuing thread, it's kind of mind-boggling. You go, wow. And so when we start rediscovering the richness of our identity and our inheritance, this is what enables us to more fully experience the presence of God in ever-increasing measure as our hearts, minds, and spirits are brought more into alignment with Him. It's interesting. Years ago, I went to the Masters University. It's a private Christian college. And one of the required courses, because I had a minor in Bible, was Christian theology. And the first day of class, my professor posed a pretty thought-provoking question. He said, how many of you know that Christianity does not exist? And of course, we were shocked by his seemingly blasphemous suggestion, and we're really immediately, just suffocating on our self-righteousness. And finally, he continued. He said, look, Jesus was born, lived, and died as a practicing Jew. Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, was born, lived, and died as a practicing Jew. Likewise, the 12 apostles who followed Jesus were born, lived, and died as practicing Jews. At no point did Jesus, Paul, or the 12 ever attempt to establish a, quote, religion called, quote, Christianity. However, Paul did go to great lengths, often at the risk of his life, to demonstrate that Jesus was the promised Messiah who had fulfilled the law and who now offered redemption to both Jew and Gentile. He wasn't founding Christianity. He was attempting to reform Judaism. When my professor finished explaining this, the whole class was stunned. I mean, it was pin drop silent in there. I mean, this made perfect sense, but why was this the first time we'd ever heard this? And why did Christianity forget its Hebrew roots? If you really want the answer, we got to go back 1900 years for that, because a rather compelling argument can be made that early Western Christianity widely embraced a couple of things that really entrenched this sort of break, right? The first was that Israel had been rejected by her God. And secondly, that the church was now the new Israel. And this argument had two basic, quote, facts that it relied upon as proof. The first was the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 AD under the direction of the Roman Emperor Titus. And the second was the destruction of the Jewish nation in 135 AD who was led by the false Messiah, Simon Bar Kokhba, right? So this is the defeat that they suffered in the Bar Kokhba revolt. Now, we're actually going to sort of delve a little bit more into the history in part 2. But I just want to kind of quickly go over and talk about. So we discussed that there are 3 basic mindsets that are kind of governing things, that there's multiple variations of each, and they've all had sort of their day in the sun and then out and then back in. And, it's kind of like a revolving door, if you will. But over time, we sort of lost this sense of who we are. We lost our sense of identity. And the Bible, in both the Old and New Testament, makes it very clear that our identity is ultimately in Jesus, and that we, the Gentile branch and the Jewish branch, have been grafted together into the one branch, which is Jesus. Jesus is the root that these 2 branches have been grafted into. And it's always been God's plan from the very beginning, from the time that he set up his covenant with Abraham, all the way until Jesus' death on the cross, which actually sealed the deal and made that possible. And so, because we've forgotten our identity, because we've forgotten where we came from, because we've maybe not really totally understood what the Bible said in terms of who we were and giving us our identity, we've lost that. But there's also, like I said, these 2 things that I touched on very briefly. We're going to go into more detail in our part 2, but these 2 things also gave a sort of like historical reason for this split and this divide, and ultimately where the Hebrew roots of the faith were just removed almost entirely. So we'll talk about and delve into that reason in part 2. But I just wanted to give you a chance to, did you have anything that you wanted to add, honey?
Yeah, I think that it's so powerful, because when you kind of come to this understanding and you realize why maybe this was my experience, why maybe I felt like a lot of my walk was powerless. A lot of my walk felt like it was, I just kind of kept going back to my own strength, and I would, check in with God, but it wasn't something that was like built in this way. And I remember one of the things that was so profound for me was when we were in Israel and we saw the our rabbi sharing, what they do on Sabbath. And he had his family there, and he had his little children there, and his 2 little boys that were really little, like 2 and 4. And they were so excited to share. And they spoke, Proverbs 31 over. He spoke it over his wife. He speaks it over his daughter. They do these blessings every week. Imagine growing up with that kind of word being spoken over you, that kind of guidance, that kind of just knowing who you are. And I cried. I sat there and tears were pouring down my face. And in the moment, I didn't know why. Most of my trip there, I sat with tears pouring down my face, and I didn't know why. And I was even thinking at some points, like, why am I so emotional? This is like the trip of a lifetime. And it was. But I really realized that God was speaking to my heart. And I believe that this is why the enemy goes after our identity so much, and why this is so important in our walks, in our Christianity, is to really understand who we are and who God says we are. And he wants to remind us of that daily, weekly, and it's transformational. And, even when we align with the Hebrew months, to remember that in those days, the Hebrews looked at each month as a prophetic time. There was a prophetic message, and there's so much guidance when we align. And so I love that we're jumping into this right now, and because it was very huge for me to learn, because once I started discovering this, we were just like, well, how did this happen? How did we go like this? And when you go in the beginning, and maybe it's just off a little bit, but by the time you're 2000 years later, you're like so far. And I think about Jesus's prayer, and it was his prayer not long before he went to the cross, of unity. and that the Jew and the Gentile would be united and they would know the Father. And that is the, his heart. And he prayed for that so diligently. So we love this, and we love sharing this. We love that you are here doing this with us. And we're going to be going through this. It might be a 3-parter because there's a lot of information. And I think it's so awesome how Dan really lays this out and how he shares about this, because once I guarantee you that by learning this and understanding this, it's going to open your mind more so in your Christian walk and in your faith. And that's really the bottom line of why we're here and why we pour our hearts into this.
Yeah, you can unsee it once you see it.
True. Very true.
It's very powerful, and it's very encouraging. It's very encouraging. It's so, like, it just feels like there's this piece that was missing that you didn't realize it was missing until it got fit back in. And it's really a great thing. So we're so happy that you joined us this week, and we look forward to seeing you guys next week when we delve into part 2, where we're going to go into more detail about the historical reasons for this divide and for this break from the Hebrew mindset.
Yeah, we're super excited. And share this if you know people that are interested in learning more about the Hebrew. Invite them to our group. Invite them. You can share this video. You can invite them into the group. They can watch it here, or you can get the link off of our YouTube channel and share our YouTube link. So we love doing life with you guys. Have a beautiful and blessed week, and we will see you next Wednesday.
Yeah. Shalom, everyone.
Shalom.